Happy Rom-Com Month, everybody. We are doing 28 Days of Love, and today is day 3. I am your host, Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker. And when I speak, my topic is something I call Take the Doughnut. It's another way of saying Carpe Diem. And it comes from this weird thing that happened to me in college where I left an actual donut on a table, but that became an object lesson for me and what it looks like to leave an opportunity behind. So now I want to take the donut. So, from time to time, I'll issue myself a Take the Donut challenge. I'll say there's something I want to go after. I'll make it official. It helps me hold myself accountable to it. But this time, I'm opening it up to anybody who wants to join. So, here we are. We're doing 28 Days of Love. Again, it's day 3, and I'm going to share 10 things I love about the movie Notting Hill, but I'm not doing it alone. Today, I have a very special guest with me. It's Danielle Turchiano, who's a former journalist and the host of the Made Possible by Pop Culture podcast. Welcome, Danielle.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here to talk about Notting Hill. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us a bit about your background with this film without giving away any of your favorite things about it. Like, why pick this one?
Sure. Well, so I'll start with myself. You kind of already set it up perfectly. I had about 15 years in entertainment journalism. That industry right now is very nebulous. So I haven't been working in it, but I've been hosting a podcast that kind of still allows me to do what I loved about journalism, just telling people stories. And we'll be coming into season 3 this year. I don't have a launch date for it yet, but sometime this year. It's all interviews, people who have deep loves of pop culture from their past, and then we look at something in their present that's influential as well, which is honestly usually just where they can promote whatever project they have currently. Talking about like my journey with Notting Hill is an interesting question because I don't really feel like I have a journey per se. It came out in 1999. I was 14, almost 15 when it came out. And I remember seeing it in theaters. And I remember enjoying it a lot at the time. But I do feel like it was one of those movies where I didn't watch it over and over again right away. I mean, obviously it was different back then in terms of how often you could. It wasn't, there was no streaming. So by the time it came to home entertainment, video or DVD, it was already a little bit later. I don't remember watching it a lot right at the jump, but I do remember picking up the DVD and just having it for years, and I would watch it sporadically. And I do feel like as I got older, viewing it multiple times, I did start to have more of a thought change about certain elements of the film. And I think it was a little bit more about me understanding storytelling versus me understanding relationships. Um, but I don't know because it was never a movie where then I got to interview anybody about the movie because it was, so many years before my time in journalism.
So interesting. Yeah, it's funny with this film on this list. When I was curating the list of the films I wanted to talk about, this is one of the ones that I hadn't seen in a long time, but I remembered that I had really liked it and I watched it a bunch of times when I was younger. I mean, maybe not exactly when it first came out, but in the probably early 2000s, I watched this a bunch of times. I remembered really liking it and I hadn't seen it in forever. So I was like, "Oh, I hope it holds up when I put this on the list." And then I watched it again for this and I thought, okay, like it was so funny because when I'd get to certain parts of it, I was like, oh, this is when this happens. Even though I hadn't seen it in forever, it was so fixed in my memory. So I don't know. I'm really excited to talk about this one. I'm also really excited that you're going to be our guest for both of the Julia Roberts films on this list. So I'm pretty stoked about that one as well. We're going to get into Pretty Woman too. But Notting Hill is the one we're talking about today. Just to, first of all, to give a little background on this film, it came out in 1999, directed by Roger Mitchell and written by Richard Curtis. And just to keep it simple, it stars Hugh Grant as William Thacker and Julia Roberts as Anna Scott. And this is definitely prime Hugh Grant years in terms of like rom-coms and just like what a time he was in during that period. So the way we'll talk about this one, we're not going scene by scene, but what we are going to do is we're going to share the top 10 things that we love about this film. And I'm going to take the even numbers and Danielle will take the odd ones. And I'm going to start off with one that's very specific. I have a mix of things that are extremely specific and things that are a little more general. I'm number 10 for me, poor apricots soaked in honey. Um,
It
they
is very
they get
specific.
no love in this film, but it's so funny to me. And it was, I for because it's been a while since I've seen this film, the whole when he starts getting really awkward when she's at his house and he's talking all about the apricots and honey, and he's disparaging them, not really intending to, and he's doing the classic Hugh Grant, like he just sort of talks everything down in the most lovable, funny way. And I thought he's just doing too much with the apricots. And then she addresses it in the script. I was like, this is it. This is me. I love it so much. It's a really small thing, but if you know me, you're going to know I love something as weird as this. So I had to start there. And I know you're probably going to go much bigger.
That is so specific. And I feel like now I'm going to give everybody a little bit of whiplash because I did want to start with one of the broader, maybe not bigger, but just broader elements of the film because growing up, I always wanted to work in the entertainment industry. So I was always like actively seeking out media that was about the entertainment industry. And I'm not going to be here to argue that this movie is about Hollywood because it's not. But because Anna's character is an actor, there are a lot of really fun elements that bring in the industry. And obviously it's fiction, but I loved the idea of watching a character like that navigate a relationship while working, while being overseas, away from her home and away from her own support system. Like you get to, I know you want to talk about this later, so I won't get into detail, but you get to see his support system. You don't see hers. Um, you get to go with her to set. You get to go with her to a junket. To me, there was so many interesting elements about that type of person entering into a relationship with a quote unquote regular person. It's not quite like the opposites attract. That was such a rom-com genre trope, but it is very much like two people from different sides of the world, literally, and then also in who they are, I guess, in a figurative sense, because she is so public, he is so private, but then it becomes public and it becomes a problem. And for me, I did want to talk about some of those specifics later on as we talk, as I had made a list of five things that are different levels of specificity, but I want to start with the overall idea of that type of character in a relationship to then set up the specifics to come.
Yeah, so you're number nine. It's this like big, like the media personality, the this woman with this job and how the different worlds are colliding. I think, and it's interesting that you said like she's so public and he's such a has a more private, he has more privacy about him. But then when you actually look at how they are as people, she is extremely private and he's extremely public because his whole family knows everything that he's doing. And so it is really interesting to see culturally how their circumstances impact how they are in the world and how they behave. But yeah, I love that this movie peels back the curtain on it because I think there's such a fascination with celebrity culture that we still have. It was relevant then, it's relevant now. And in a way, I guess we've peeled back the curtain more because there are more ways for people to communicate who they are than there used to be. But
Right.
this really beautifully captures like that whole aura that she had.
And I mean, also, I would argue it captures it, but then at some points, the image that you're projecting is maybe not who you are. Like we as an audience are seeing this woman in ways that her fans are not in that world, which is a whole other layer that the movie doesn't necessarily get into in a meta way, but like that's how I was watching the movie in a strange way of like, who are you and who are you showing yourself to be in what situation?
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually goes really well with what I have for number eight. Um, a cousin of a topic, but not the same thing. This is really pre social media. And I think that's a really interesting element for this film, especially if somebody is younger watching back, because it almost would be hard to put yourself in. Like the fact that they can get away with this for as long as they can before it's super public is wild to think about now. But you have to really rewind the clock and put yourself in a situation where not every single person has a phone and a way to blast information out, and they
Right.
can have these encounters and have a little bit of privacy about them until they don't. And I think that inherently changes how the courtship process kind of starts here and the fact that it can exist at all. So, and, like the fact that he's able to sort of get away with faking being, a journalist himself in the beginning, like this would be so easily checked and vetted.
Oh,
So like I think there's a lot of things about this that you probably would have to do this movie very differently now to make it make sense. Um, you'd have to put them on like a private island or something, like in a resort setting, or like, I don't know, you'd have to keep them away from the public eye to be able to achieve what this
right.
film achieved. But that's what makes it so beautiful. So it's a little bit of a time capsule in how it shows things.
Yeah, I would also just keep thinking of like the character of Spike. Like he can't exist if in a world with social media in this story because he would have been that first person to take a photo and blast it the way that he told everybody, and then somebody did call the paparazzi in that actual example in the film.
Hmm.
Or even the fact that like she even goes back to the house the first time because he's like, "Oh, I spilled something on you, I can clean you up, but also I have a phone you can use." Like, of course, today you have your own phone in your pocket. You don't need that.
Yeah, yeah. It's fun to think about the just like this is very of its time while communicating something that could still be true today. It's just you'd have to do it differently. And it's kind of neat to think about like how they had to get there for this film. But yeah, so for me, number 8, just seeing a pre-social media world. But what do you have for number 7?
Well, because you already referenced the pretends to be a journalist, I do want to talk about that junket. It ties back into my overall, number 9, my theme of the look at Hollywood, the look at the entertainment industry. But um, she invites him effectively to come and meet her. Let me use actual names. Anna invites William to come and meet her at a hotel while she's working, and it happens to overlap with a junket. And when he gets there, it's not just the idea of seeing the inner workings of the junket that I was interested in. Like that was a big part of it when I was younger and didn't know how Hollywood worked. But what I ended up finding myself really gravitating to was his behavior during the junket because he arrives there knowing he's supposed to just meet her, but like just kind of goes with the flow and like pretends he's a journalist and says he's from Horse and Hound of all places and he hasn't seen the movie, and then he's thrust in the room with her and there's somebody there in the room with them, so he thinks he has to keep up the ruse of being a journalist and asks her ridiculous questions that I do feel like the production team behind this movie maybe had a little axe to grind against journalists because some journalists do ask really bad questions like that when they haven't seen the movie. And I feel like this was them working through some stuff. But in this case, and then, after that, even when she says, I'm so sorry that this overlapped and everything, he gets ushered out of the room and the woman who's running the junket just takes him through the rotation. So he has to repeat it all again with other actors in the film, which is like, why are you a person who doesn't just stand up and say, no, no, I'm okay, I'm good, I don't need to talk, like something to not go through these motions. And I feel like it's a odd psychology thing for his character of this is just who he is. He's just kind of very laid back and just like placid and goes through the motions of things. And I honestly feel like that's a lot of why they ended up working as a couple because he can take things in stride with a crazy industry and schedule. And I don't know if that was entirely intentional, the way that they wrote these scenes for that reason, or if they just thought, hey, here's some good comedic effect, because I think it works on both levels. But there's just this one scene where he comes out of the last junket room and he just looks so defeated and dejected. And I'm like, that is what it feels like to be a true working journalist during a junket. You've nailed this on very many levels.
That's so good. So he was playing the role, but he managed to capture the feeling.
I
I
mean, you know what? He probably, as Hugh Grant, had that feeling on that side of the junket many times. So he probably wasn't having to reach too far. But it was fascinating, especially to watch it back now as somebody who has gone through the process of junkets for so long. Why you would ever pretend to be a journalist to get in one is beyond me, but here we are.
especially when you don't actually know, like, he didn't
Yeah,
really know who these people were. So
yeah,
it wasn't
exactly.
like he was trying to have the celebrity moment with everybody. Yeah, I think and I do think that the choice of how this scenario was written plays in really well with something Hugh Grant does really well, of that self-deprecating humor.
Mhm.
Because in this situation, he actually is not good at what he's doing. And I think that is so often the type of humor that his characters will go to, especially during this time period. But it works beautifully in this situation because everybody's in on this joke, except maybe the organizer. you know
And maybe the other actors. There was Misha Bart played the young actress, and his literal question is like, "Is this your first movie?" And she's like, "No, it's my 28th." And I'm like, it speaks also, I think, to what you were talking about the technology. Like, you don't ask questions like that. You make sure you can check who they are before you sit down. But it's a combination of he doesn't have IMDb in his pocket. He's also like not a journalist by trade, doesn't know what he's supposed to be doing. I feel like everybody had a pretty good laugh at that.
Yeah, so good. Okay, so that was number seven. Let's talk about number six. This one is another one that's pretty specific for me. Um, but as soon as the movie started, I was like, oh, this is the one with Ain't No Sunshine. And I don't know if I had ever heard the song Ain't No Sunshine by Bill Withers before, but I remembered that scene because the song was so beautiful and he's so dejected. And so when I got to that scene in this watch, I was more impressed with the scene when I actually watched the screen and watched what was happening, because I forgot that he walks through Notting Hill through the passing of seasons. So they show the passage of
Right.
time, and I they do it in a way that's he's wearing the same coat the whole time, and then he eventually takes it off when it's spring or summer. Um, but they're showing like leaves falling and snow on the ground at different points. And it's like, how did they shoot this exactly? People around him are interacting in different ways. And it looks like one long shot. I don't know if they cut it and blended it at points. But it's beautifully done. But the song is what really captured me. And, I thank this movie for introducing me to Bill Withers and to, like, there are certain things that this movie does in a very artistic way that it could do in a less artistic way. And I like even the opening montage with showing Julia Roberts, with showing Anna, like I think
Right.
it's this some really interesting artistic choices, and that scene in particular jumps out for me. So I had to mention that here in number six.
Yeah. I mean, everybody who heard me on your podcast last time knows I'm terrible with music, but I would like to just for the record state that I had heard that song prior to this movie, so I do feel better about that. But I agree. I like the way they used it, especially the passage of time is so important in this movie because otherwise I would think that the relationship could feel so rushed, especially because of how much you see change in her work situation and how much other things are around them that are happening. I don't know. I feel like you can't. My biggest gripe with a lot of rom-coms is how quickly we're supposed to expect these people or believe these people have actually fallen in love and should be together forever. So I appreciated that they took the time to show some of the distance and the time.
Yeah. And he goes through like more than one bout of heartbreak in this. Like it's like the passage of time and like the cycling of many emotions also that ends up happening here, which I think makes it a more believable situation than it might have been. Because yeah, you're right. A lot of films rush into it. You're like, I don't know that I can buy into this instant love situation. Um, but here they sort of find ways to take their time with it. Okay, so we picked a really specific one for number six. What do you have for number five?
I mean, I kind of want to go bigger, broader again, rather, because I want to stay in theme with what you're talking about. There's I just said that like a lot of rom-coms expect you to just believe it and it's a quick time. And I say that because I grew up watching a lot of like Disney movies with the princesses, and you just are supposed to believe these people are together. They're supposed to be together. They're supposed to live happily ever after. I also grew up with a lot of sitcoms where it was that whole like really pretty wife and really schlubby husband, and you're just supposed to believe that they're happy and they work, even though like they gripe at each other. And I do feel like there's a sense of magic in those types of projects that force you, or not force you, but that is the thing that's making you believe. And I would argue that there's a sense of magic to this movie as well, for some of the same reasons I've said before, just in terms of like they're from very different walks of life, and yet they're going to click and they're going to work, and you're going to maybe not be forced to believe it immediately. Maybe you'll see it by different encounters that they have. But to me, there was a sense of like, why I had this question, and I had this question not the first time I watched it, but many times after as I got older from that first time. Why would she want to be with this guy? Because we get to know him, and so we get the answers. But he does seem like a very regular, and I said laid back before, but you could also spin that into a negative if you wanted to, just very like passive person. Um, and maybe she was craving something normal. Who knows? At a point in my life watching this movie, I felt like this was a negative about the movie, that it was like, oh, maybe they're underdeveloped characters and that's why I'm having this problem. But I also feel like, well, the reason I didn't have the problem when I was young watching it for the first time was because I was willing to just accept the magic of the genre. And I think if you are willing to go on the ride, you have to accept the magic of the genre. And I think this movie has that, for all the reasons that you're talking about, the music and the changing of the seasons and the time, and then for all the things that I'm talking about, the different worlds coming together. And as you want to talk about later, the people around him that also accept her. And it was a really interesting experience for me to rewatch this movie, to talk about it with you, because I'm so jaded and cynical that I'm like, had I not seen this movie when I was first 14, I don't know if I would have been able to go on that ride and just be like, magic, remember the magic, accept it. That's what this genre does.
I like that you brought up Disney because this movie, as you're saying that, it's kind of like a reverse Cinderella almost. There might be another Disney film that's a better parallel, but there's something
Oh, but like
about
the
it.
regular person, and then
Yeah.
elevated like rich. I mean, he Prince Charming's not really a celebrity, but you could equal wealth and fame in the comparison.
Yeah, and like, Cinderella goes again, there could be a Disney film that's like a better fit, but like Cinderella goes to more than one ball, it keeps kind of like trying again. And then he kind of dips into this world more times,
Mhm.
and then the prince comes looking for Cinderella. And I think this sort of happens in reverse in that way. And I think again, you kind of do have to buy into this idea that like she's just not been able to be around people like him. Um, Even amid regular people, they're also awestruck by her. And when he is in the beginning, he knows who she is.
That's my next thing, but I don't want us to jump there. But yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. So it's like this really interesting thing of like he still has a different reaction than
Hmm.
other people. So I think there's got to be a novelty in that for her where he just sort of occupies a space that nobody has occupied in her experience. So I think but I think a lot of times as adults when we see things that are I'm in a couple of different film discussion groups, and I find sometimes when we get to things that are like best thought of as a fairy tale, but people aren't thinking of it that way, I'll be the one to be like, maybe we need to think about this as a fairy tale. And it totally shifts how you look at a thing when you put magic back in.
Yes.
So I love that you brought that up here because magic is all over this film for sure. And then, your mileage may vary.
Yeah. Yeah. Why a lot of people like don't necessarily love this one as much as some of the other ones on your list.
Hmm.
Because I agree. I don't think I always would have been thinking of this movie in that way. And then I think I would have been maybe picking it apart more than it deserves, because you have to kind of give a little forgiveness with the genre when you think of it that way.
Yeah. So this really leads me well into number four, um, because it's sort of the if you're the cynic, what can you cling on to in this film? I love that when she comes back to him, he says no.
Hmm.
And he says all the things I would want him to say in real life.
Hmm.
pretty much all of them, regardless of what the reaction will be later. The fact that he has
Right.
this moment where he, you know, this new customer comes in and interrupts Anna saying her feelings, but then she goes on anyway, and like he's able to just be like, you know what, this can't be like you like it's not going to work, like you've hurt me before, like we can't do this, you know, like he goes in with all of that and it's all true. um and I think if he didn't say that stuff, I would have really struggled. Like if he accepts her open arms in that moment, I don't know if I would like this film very much because I don't know if I could get past that. That
Yeah.
he's a guy who has seemed so practical the whole way through, just sort of like somehow caught up in this weird whirlwind, and then to just suddenly be like, yeah, I'll give it another shot,
Yeah.
even though it's been sort of traumatizing for him up until this point. Um, I really appreciate that they give him this moment of saying, hard pass, not because I don't want to, but I just think this isn't good. So, like, and she's, you know, it hurts, but how can she not see that? So I think it's really important to me that we have that, and I to have that scene exist within a film about a magical relationship. I think, you know, maybe there is something there for the cynic.
Well, I would also think, like, to me that, yeah, it does speak to my cynicism, but it also speaks to the character growth I was looking for from him. Because there were so many moments that, like I said, I just felt like he was just kind of there going along with things. I'm sure he had inner workings in his mind we weren't privy to, but I wanted to see him not be a doormat. And so they gave us that moment, which was great.
I
I
also love that in the not being a doormat in that same situation, because he has that customer comes in to ask him a question, the guy who's always there. And I
Yeah,
just love that he's strong enough in that moment to be able to say, go
yeah,
away immediately. Like, how many times
yes.
have you wanted to do that in real life? You're talking to the person that you really want to hear what's happening. This is the conversation I want. And then somebody comes in, and for him to be able to do the thing that nobody can do in real life and be like, you need to stop. Like, leave my presence.
Yeah, but it's also such a reversal from like, and this was going to be my next thing when he meets her, but it's such a reversal from like the guy who's shoplifting literally puts the book in his pants. And Hugh Grant Will is not like, oh, you absolutely have to buy that now. He's like, you could buy it or you could wipe it off and put it back. Who are you? What? No. And so then to see him go from the person that would be like people pleasing like that to standing his ground, that's what I also meant by growth, not just with the relationship, but him as a man overall in this movie. Um, but yeah.
Is that number three for you?
Also, it was the overall scene of their first meeting was number three. And it's I want to preface this by you said a second ago, like, obviously he knew who she was. And yes, he does know who she is when they first meet in the bookstore. But I think a lot of what I loved about that scene was that without the voiceover from the beginning of the film where he's walking down the street where he's talking about Anna Scott, you could watch that first scene and wonder if he knows if he knows who she is, or if he's just looking at her because he finds her an attractive woman that's wandered into his shop, because he is so normal about the interaction. He's not fawning all over her. He's not even like tongue-tied because he's nervous beyond his usual, like, nervous as the character, not nervous because she's a famous person that walked in. I love the way it's shot, where like you're just on his profile and the door opens and you as the audience can't really see who it is. You know who it is because you know how movies work, but like she's blurry and she goes to a an area where she's hidden by a shelf for a minute. Um, and even the way, like, when his friend comes back in the store with their drinks and he's like, you know, he says, you'll never believe who is in here. But then he actively says, no, it's not someone famous. Like, he was messing with his friend a little bit, but like, it also reads, I felt like the first time I saw it, it read like maybe he wasn't sure it was even her. Like, could he believe his good luck that that's who walked into his store? And I interpreted that way, kind of maybe in another way of like looking at who he is as a character and being like, this is who he believes himself to be. Like he could never be that lucky because he's had such a shitty situation this whole time. Like his store is failing, he's divorced, he has a terrible roommate, like he's really down on himself and down on his life. Um, but I don't know, I just love that whole interaction. I loved that it is not your traditional cheesy meet cute, although they do give you that later when he does spill the coffee on her. But like so many other movies, that would have been the first time they met. And
Mm.
I'm really glad that that's not what they did in this movie.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you can have sort of more than one way of looking at the first time they meet each other. And again, I think that goes in really well with the idea that, like, she's either around really people who are just as famous as her all the time, and we've seen what kind of people, especially what kind of men she's accustomed to in that world. They give us a couple examples and they're not good.
No.
So it's like it's either that or like all of his family and friends characters and like the people in the store who are just like ogling and like it's like what they are stunned at seeing her, and they become different versions of themselves even, and she doesn't even know who they are, but she can see that they're not normal for themselves. And like I think to have this very singular encounter with William where he seems to be very composed, we can see that he's measuring his words quite a bit, especially as we get more scenes with him. But it must be so refreshing for her to have that, and for her to be able to like keep some level of anonymity with somebody. So yeah, it's so good. I love that you pinpointed that scene. Let's talk about number two. And we've sort of teased this a couple times coming into this, but I love after he has said no. He then goes back to his family, his whole support system, and we've gotten to know them really well throughout this film. And they hear it, they hear the retelling of what just happened, and they're like, oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then Spike comes back and he's like, hard no. What happened? Like, what is going on? Like, I don't understand. I think just all of the way that unfolded, like when they're all together, they're trying to give him the acceptance and love they feel he needs for what might have been a good decision, what felt like a good decision to me in that moment. And then for them to say, and now you need your second chance moment, and then to empower him to have that, I think it really goes to show you like how very supported he is and how very not supported she is. Um, and how appealing it must be to her to be put into his world where there are people around you who are willing to go to bat for you like this, whether you need to be uh, told that you did the right thing or told that you did the wrong thing and help you fix it. They're there for all of it. And I just, it's such a nice, a lot of times I feel like in rom-coms, people have these moments of realization internally
Hmm.
where like they're just like, oh, I now know I was supposed to go after the other person. And then they go and they run really far.
Yes.
But here to have like the support system feels like a nuance in this film.
Yeah. And it's something that I think I don't know Richard Curtis, and I don't, personally, and I don't know if this is drawn from anything in his own life, but it does feel not American. I will say that. Like, as odd as that sounds, because we're constantly talking about communities and stuff here, you don't see it in a lot of in a lot of rom-coms that are American made rom-coms. You definitely see like everybody's got that sidekick friend that's usually like maybe the one diverse person or the one gay character, whoever, and like they bounce things off that character, and that character doesn't have an inner life in the movie. This movie doesn't do that. Like even his family members, we get to know them really well through dialogue, not through like following their lives, but they feel well-rounded, but they also feel like I believe that this is a unit in the world, and it's nice to see a person relying on their unit and their community because that to me is how life is supposed to be.
Absolutely. Well, we have one more in our list of 10 favorite things. So, what do you want to bring in?
Well, I do want to preface this by saying that it's not like my number one favorite thing about it's just the way that this list netted out in terms of the order that I chose to speak about things. But I do want to kind of piggyback off of what you were just talking about with that support system. But I want to look at the first scene where they're just getting, Anna and Will are just getting to know each other. And she's like, I'll go with you to your sister's birthday dinner, which I thought was an insane thing to say the first time I saw the movie. But then when I watched the scene unfold, I realized how much it spoke to her character and her loneliness, but also her interest in what that could even look like a non-Hollywood party, a party with these nice people who are, as you were just saying, like a real support system for this man. And then they get to the moment where they're fighting, not fighting, but they're like, who deserves a brownie? And they have to tell the saddest story, like who deserves it the most based on how sad your life is. And everybody at the table is like, there's no way this $15 million netting actress is going to even be able to compete. But then the things that she says are so human. And yeah, there is something in there that she says about like being on a diet since 19. And yes, that is because of the work that she does. But what woman can't relate to that in a way of like, we've all been told from different people for different reasons about watching our weight. And it's never because of our health, it's always because of what we look like. Um, and she talks about the men in her life and like how she's had bad boyfriends, one of whom hit her, and things that like you would never say publicly as a celebrity. She's never been able to let her guard down the way the paparazzi follow her, the things that she's nervous about. But in this one evening, she feels comfortable enough to open up to these people and also to thankfully give the audience some insight into her because as much as we see his life, we don't go home with her. We don't really know. We know about her as a person, but we don't get to see a lot of the like intricacies of her intimate life. So I really like that scene because it lets us in on her in so many different ways. Um, but I also like that scene because I like the table. I like the different characters at the table that we get to meet and that we get to know, as I said a minute ago, just like through dialogue, sure, and you can argue that's maybe expositional, but like that's more than most American rom-coms give us.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. And so trust building because on the back of that, they're not like blurting out everything she said to the world,
Right.
and they don't necessarily have a means to do that, but we also feel like they're not even talking about it privately with people.
Mm.
Um, I mean, yes, Spike's a different story later, but like at that table, at that, like
Right.
that,
Yeah.
like she's able to reveal these very personal things about herself that I'm sure she wouldn't want to get out, and it doesn't. So, like I think she probably comes away feeling, tenfold how she felt before she walked into that house, where she's able to say these people honored my story. Um, and that's probably never happened for her.
Mhm.
So it's so beautiful. Well, that's our top 10 list. That's what we love about Notting Hill. Okay, everybody watching this, the question is, what do you love about this film? There's all kinds of things that we probably didn't even mention here. What jumps out for you when you think about this film? What do you love about Notting Hill? Feel free to share that in the comments. Before I wrap this one up for us, Danielle, anything that you want to plug? I know you had a little bit of a chance to do that at the beginning, but anything you want coming up? Here we are, February 3rd. Anything you want people to watch out for coming up?
I mean, I genuinely don't know, honestly, when my new season will start because I was going to start it by now, but the wildfires in LA have had me pushing it. So I don't know. I mean, the past two seasons of my podcast are available on YouTube and then anywhere you can listen to podcasts if you're interested in it. And the only other thing I ever plug these days is my dog's Instagram, The Real Mr. Archie. Um, at some point, I'll have a job I want to talk about, but no, right now it's mostly let's get Archie some more work.
Okay, there it is, everybody. You know what to go look for. And so next time, next movie that we're going to cover here in Rom-Com Month, it's going to be day 4. We're going to talk about a very different film from this one, Something Borrowed from 2011. Maybe the opposite in terms of like not magic. Um,
Also, I do appreciate though that you're not doing these completely chronologically because I think you get to see an interesting diversity when you bounce around in time of like how were movies being made? How were this type of movie specifically being made?
Yeah. So I can't wait to talk about that one. So Something Borrowed is maybe a lesser known film. I don't know. It has Ginnifer Goodwin, it has Kate Hudson, Colin Egglesfield, John Krasinski, Steve Howie, Ashley Williams. What a cast. And if that weren't enough, I'm not covering that one alone either. I've got a very special guest who is going to be America Lopez from Big Brother 25 and the America Tells All podcast. So we're going to have such a blast talking about Something Borrowed for day 4. I hope you'll join me again, everybody. And in the meantime, happy rom-com month, everybody. Get love, get donuts. Bye.